you say we get started? Janet, you want to take it away?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me pop back here and find my notes. And there we are. Welcome, everyone. My name is Janet Forrest. I'm one of the adult coordinators here at the Nantucket Atheneum, along with my colleague, Amy Janess. And tonight we have an author talk with Peter Browne. I'm going to introduce him now. He was born on July 4th in 1942 on Nantucket. Peter is the author of several books, including The Bachelor's Bible, a tongue-in-cheek self-help book, I'm on the Computer, a memoir about his real job as a computer industry professional, and the Present Future Trilogy. It's a series about the world 1,000 years after Columbus discovered America, which contends that the issues of today will be the issues of tomorrow, and that outcomes are dependent upon good versus evil and the whims of an indifferent universe. Peter got the idea for his most recent book in 2001 from a poem depicting a life lost to time, titled Oh Nantucket. The social unrest occurring in 2020 reawakened those thoughts of Nantucket and of the social dissonance prevalent during his childhood days. Peter currently shares his time between Florida and Martha's Vineyard with his wife of 48 years, and he has 2 children. So let's give Peter a warm welcome, and I'll pass it off to you, Peter.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter M. Browne. That's Browne with an E. I'm a Nantucket native and of Cape Verdean descent. I want to thank you all for joining me this evening. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share my story with you, and I hope you'll find it interesting and enlightening. First, I want to talk about my life growing up on Nantucket in the Cape Verdean community and how it parallels the novel Oh Nantucket. Next, I want to discuss what prompted me to write Oh Nantucket, and then to take a look back in time to the Cape Verde Islands and the reasons for the diaspora that scattered us around the globe and how this all ties together. And finally, an opportunity for some questions. Now, it all began for me on July 4th, 1942. I was born in the Nantucket Cottage Hospital, the old Nantucket Cottage Hospital. I believe it was on West Chester Street. I was the second generation of my family to be born on Nantucket. My mother was born on Nantucket on August 10th, 1918. Now, I was the 4th generation of my family to reside on Nantucket. But I was 7 years old before I realized that everyone's birthday wasn't celebrated as a holiday with a parade and fireworks. We lived at 41 Washington Street. And I can recall many times as a child and as an adult, looking out the windows on the top floor over the view of the Nantucket Harbor, and I could see all the way to Monomoy and Coatue. It was just a breathtaking view. Now, Browne is not a Cape Verdean name, but that's a story for another time. My mother's maiden name was Gomes. Our extended family consisted of Vieiras, Monteros, Rodericks, and Mendes. We were a bilingual family. And for those of you that grew up in a bilingual family, you know that as a young child growing up, before you go to school, you learn lots of words, mimicking your parents and other adults, and you have no idea what words are English and what words are not. And when I started grade school, I began to realize that a number of words that I knew for objects were not English words at all. Now, when I was growing up, language, the Cape Verdean language and the history of our culture, it just wasn't something that was discussed. I really didn't know much about it. And it wasn't until I was an adult, I was working for Digital Equipment Corporation, and I was assigned as an instructor to travel to Brazil to teach programming to the Brazilian telephone company, that I became acquainted with the differences between Portuguese and the Cape Verdean language. When I got the assignment, I was all excited. I thought, oh, I'm going to go to Brazil. I know lots of Portuguese words. This is going to be great. The company hired a tutor, so I was even more ready when I got there. But when I arrived and started speaking what I thought was Portuguese, people looked at me questioningly, and then they looked at each other and snickered, and I knew something was amiss. But it wasn't until I returned home and started to investigate that I began to appreciate the distinction between Portuguese and the Cape Verdean language. Now, the Cape Verdean language is called Creole, and it's spelled Kriolu. Now, Creole is what's defined as a pidgin language. What that means is that the language is a contraction of existing languages that are brought together to facilitate communication between non-speakers. So Cape Verdean Portuguese was a combination of Portuguese and a number of West African languages. There are varying opinions on the origin of the language and how it evolved, and there have been papers written on the subject. But I'd like to give you a couple of examples that speak to the origin. If I was to say to you in Creole that I wanted a cup of milk because I was making out a recipe, I would say to you, copo de leite. Copo, copa, cup. You can see the relationship between Portuguese and the Cape Verdean language, Creole. Same applies to the word for milk, leite, leche, leite. You can see the relationship. As opposed to, if I said to you that I wanted a cup of tea, I would say xícara de chá. Now, xícara is spelled X-I-K-R-A, with the X having an SH sound. And xícara is an alternative word for cup. And chá is a word for tea, it's spelled X-A. Now, you can clearly see that there's no relationship between those two words and Portuguese. In my day, the language was not codified. It was a spoken language, not written. And it would be well into my adulthood before I would see any words written in Creole. And as I was older, I began to study about the language and the culture, and I began to appreciate the nuance in the way the Cape Verdean language or Creole was spoken in the home. And I wrote a blog about it, and it's on my website, Peter M. Browne, brownewithE.com/blog. But I want to give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. A very common expression in Creole is ebo qui sabe. Ebo qui sabe means it's you who know. Best is implied. But what it actually means, sarcastically spoken, if someone is questioning your judgment. Do you really know what you're talking about? Another example is badod. Badod means badod means go crazy. But what it really means is you're acting like a fool, or it's an admonishment for doing something stupid. Your parents will say to you, badod. So language, culture, and experience bound our community. And one of the common elements in a bilingual family or community is the half sentence. It's a sentence that's spoken initially in English, then reverts to Creole when it's time for the essential words that must be spoken in Creole because English just does not suffice. Now, there are also shared customs. And one very common one was that of a godchild asking their godparents for their blessing. So when a godchild encountered their godparents, whether at home or on the street, they would say, "Dam benson," which means "give me your blessing." And the godparent would respond, "A ben swab," bless you. Now, there are also shared beliefs and superstitions. And one was that left-handedness was a sign of the devil. Now, I was born left-handed. And one of my aunts took it upon herself as a mission that she was going to convert me to right-handed. And every time I picked up an object with my left hand, she would pass it over to my right hand. And she kept this up, and she was persistent until I adapted. So today, I'm ambidextrous. Like any community, they have their traditions. And one of the most common in the Cape Verdean culture was canta res. Canta res means singing praises. And it's an event that takes place between the Christmas and New Year's holiday, where the minstrels would go from door to door singing and playing their musical instruments. Now, it appeared to me that every Cape Verdean male played some type of musical instrument, whether if it was only the spoons or a bass drum that was made from a wash kettle and a rope. So they would go from door to door singing until they were invited in for food and drink. They would stay a while, play a while, and go on to the next house until they had covered all the houses in the community. There was a sense of community that existed and extended beyond the family. It started with the wave. If you were driving down the street and you passed another Cape Verdean, you always gave the two-finger wave. It was an acknowledgement, we see you, and we know you're one of us. There was also the caring for each other. If the circumstances arose where a family needed something because of a health issue or what have you, folks would come over, they would cook your food, they would clean your house, they would take care of the children, whatever was necessary. Clearly the definition of community. Now, Cape Verdeans is said to have a unique look. Though we run the gamut from white as snow to dark as night, it is said that Cape Verdeans were people of color with European features. Now, my great-grandfather, Peter Vieira, for whom I'm named after, was born on the island of Fogue in the Cape Verde Islands, and I was told, though I've never met him, that he was dark as night. By contrast, his wife, Rose Vieira, was born on the Azores, and she was white as snow. Now, how the two of them were able to come together, fall in love, get married, have a family, and live successfully in a racially intolerant time, that information is simply lost to history. Now, my earliest memories are that of being poor but proud. I can remember our family in the constant search for work. I remember the winters after the scallop season, when there was no work on the island. Our family would migrate to New Bedford in search of work and would remain there until they could return in the spring when work was again available on the island. Now, my grandfather was a workaholic. I mean, he had, whenever possible, more than one job, and he would work day and night. Religion was an important element of the Cape Verdean community. Now, most Cape Verdeans were Catholics. And though the Catholic Church treated Cape Verdeans as second-class citizens, they looked beyond the church to their God, and they were devout in their religion. Now, when I was a little child growing up, toys were a scarcity, but I had a couple of unique ones. And my favorite was the Sears Catalog. And I see you out there shaking your heads now. Sears Catalog, some of you are too young to know what that is, and other of you that know probably can't relate as to how that would be a toy, but I could hardly wait for the Sears Catalog to arrive. When it arrived, I would get the scissors and I would cut out the people, I would cut out the houses, I would cut out the cars, and I would create a village in the living room by leaning the two-dimensional objects up against the legs of the table and chairs so that the print on the opposite side could not be seen. And then my imagination would do the rest, and I would play for hours until I heard those words that all children in my era heard at some point: go outside and play. And when I went outside, my favorite toy was a stick. Now, I found this stick in the backyard. I believe it had fallen from Mrs. Murphy's tree in a windstorm. And I got it and I tore all the bark off and I smoothed it down and it became my walking stick. It became my sword, my rifle, my javelin. And it was even a pen that I used to write in the wet beach sand. Now, Cape Verdeans were laborers, maids, cooks, servants, domestics, fishermen, strong backs, weak minds. That's how we were viewed. There were no jobs beyond manual labor available to Cape Verdeans at that time. My earliest education consisted primarily of gossip. I can recall, and I want you to imagine, a young child sitting in the living room playing with his Sears Catalog toys as folks would come by to visit with my grandmother to speak, gossip, talk about the day's events and talk about various people in the community. And the conversations would always start off in English. And at some point during the conversation, inevitably, they would turn to my grandmother and they would say, "Does Peter understand Creole?" And she would say, no, he doesn't understand. You can talk. And then they would go on and talk about the things that they thought were not appropriate for the ears of a young child. Now, on one occasion, my aunt came by, same scenario, started the conversation in English, got to the point where she thought, can't talk about this. So she turns to my grandmother and she says, "Are you sure that Peter can't understand Creole?" She goes, "No, he can't understand. It's okay, you can talk." But she wasn't comfortable with that. So she turns to me and she says to me in Creole, "Get me a glass of water." And I pretended like I didn't know what in the world she was talking about. So with that, she went on to tell the story about something that was certainly not fit for the ears of a child my age. School. When I attended school, there was no one who looked like me. Racism on Nantucket was passive but insidious. It was something that existed, was not spoken about. But I'll give you a couple of examples of how I encountered it personally. One Valentine's Day, when I was 7 years old, I was at school. Teacher brought in a box of Valentine's cards, told us to go through the box, pick out a card, make it out to someone that we liked. So I went through the box. I found a card that had a person's face with their lips on the crease so that when you open and close it, the lips puckered. I thought that was great. So I took the card and made it out and gave it to a girl in class that I liked. And I thought nothing of it. Days went by. And one day I'm sitting in the kitchen, at the kitchen table, and my uncle comes over, as he did every day, to pay his respects to his parents. Something that was a tradition in our family. I don't know if it was a Cape Verdean tradition, but it was certainly a tradition in our family. But on this particular day, he came over to me, smacked me on the back of my head, and said, "Leave so-and-so alone." I go, "What are you talking about?" He says, "So-and-so's mother said that you were bothering her at school. I want you to leave her alone." "What did you do?" I said, "I didn't do anything. I gave her a Valentine's card because I liked her." "Well, she doesn't like you back, and leave her alone." So that was a painful blow to a young child and something that hung with me for a while. When I was 10 years old, I had a childhood asthma attack. I can remember laying in the bed in the little room that's beside our living room with what felt like a boulder laying on my chest. So my grandmother called the doctor, explained the situation to him, and the doctor said, "Mrs. Gomes, I don't make house calls." Now, in that day, house calls was the protocol. So what he was saying was he didn't make house calls to people of color. So my grandmother swung into action. She went into the kitchen, got a couple of cloves of garlic, wrapped them up in a sock, tied them around my feet, went back in the kitchen, made some type of poultice, I don't know what it was, placed it on my forehead. And when I woke up the next morning, the asthma was gone, and I've never had another asthma attack to this day. Now, I'm sure the pharmaceutical companies will be dying to know what was in that home recipe or that home remedy. Now, I mentioned to you that my grandfather was a workaholic. One of his skills was that of a short order cook. And he saw an opportunity to open a hot dog stand up at the upper end of Washington Street, where he thought, well, that would be a perfect place to intercept the traffic passing by and make some additional money. So he approached the town, asked them for a permit. They told him that that part of Washington Street was zoned residential, so he couldn't have a permit. Now, if you walk around that part of Washington Street today, around the curve where the power plant used to be, you will find that it is anything but residential. So from the police to the priests, Cape Verdeans were treated as second-class citizens. Color was the definer. Now, one day I was sitting in the living room doing my usual thing, and a young couple, they were boy, male and female, twins, came by to visit with my grandmother. Now, they were Cape Verdean, but they were white. But because they were known as Cape Verdeans in the community, they were treated with the same discrimination as any other Cape Verdeans. And they told my grandmother that they were leaving Nantucket and they would never be returning because there were no opportunities for them on Nantucket, and that they were leaving to seek a better life. Now, as a young child, I thought this was odd, that they would want to leave their family and their community to go to a strange place where they could pass for white just to have a better life. But my grandmother understood full well and supported their decision. They talked for a long time. They laughed, they cried. And when they left, we never ever saw them again. In addition to the discrimination, I saw the contrast between rich and poor. It was all around me. The yachts, the cars, the houses, the yacht club, the tennis club, the golf clubs, the shops on Main Street with goods that were well beyond the means of any Cape Verdean, and Cape Verdeans were not even welcomed in the stores. And I couldn't understand what my family had done, that they were poor while all these other people were wealthy. In addition to that, I had my own personal struggle going on. I saw my grandfather and my uncles with calloused hands, sweat-filled brows, returning home at the end of the day, their clothes covered with the soil from that day's work. And I said to myself, if I have to do that for a living, I won't survive. So with a child's mind, I started looking around to see what it was that I could possibly do so that I could be wealthy. And I saw the artists on the wharfs painting seagulls and sailboats. I saw them on Main Street painting the cobblestones. I saw them on the side streets painting colorful window boxes and ornate doorways. And I thought, I'll be an artist. I'll make lots of money. And that's just how it'll be. So when no one was looking, grabbed a sheet of paper and a pencil, tried to draw something, and realized I couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. So art was out, but I remembered cantares. Every single Cape Verdean male played some kind of musical instruments. I never saw them practicing. So playing a musical instrument must be intuitive. I'll play a musical instrument, and that'll be my out. So when no one was looking, grabbed my grandfather's accordion, put it on my knee, unstrapped it, opened it up, and started to mimic what I saw him doing. Well, the sounds were horrific. So I go, well, maybe that's too advanced. Let me start with something simpler. Went and found my uncle's harmonica, tried to play that, same result. That wasn't happening. About that time, the Boys Club opened, and I think it was on Francis Street, if I'm not mistaken. And so I joined the Boys Club. They were playing basketball. I go, sports. I can be a basketball player. I'm tall. That's what I'll do. I'll make lots of money. So I tried to play basketball. And I found that all the kids at the Boys Club had nicknames. There was Sure Shot, Mr. Dribbles, And my nickname became Around the Rim, but Never In. So, sports wasn't going to do it. And on top of that, I was dyslexic and would not find that out for many years because no one knew anything about dyslexia in those days. As time passed, I got older. I was able to apply for summer employment, but the only jobs available for Cape Verdeans were in the back rooms, washing dishes, cleaning up after hours. Cape Verdeans were not allowed in any customer-facing positions. You couldn't be a clerk, couldn't be a cashier, couldn't be a waiter, couldn't be a waitress. Didn't understand why this was the case on Nantucket. I thought back to the racist South. I mean, people of color cooked for white folks and served them, acted as butlers and doormen and all those custom-facing positions. So I didn't understand this northern racism until I understood the distinction or the separation of the word prejudice to prejudge. Years passed, deaths came. First my grandparents, then my aunts and uncles, then my parents. And like the young couple that came to visit my grandmother, many Cape Verdeans, young Cape Verdeans, left Nantucket when they graduated from high school or before because there just were not opportunities on the island. They did not leave out of choice, they left out of necessity. Now my family lived on Nantucket on Washington Street for some 90 years. But in the end, our properties were lost to family disputes and broken promises. Nantucket was no longer home. My heart was broken. I moved on. But how does a person with no discernible skills succeed? Luck, perseverance, providence, all the above. Now, my mother was forced to quit school in the 8th grade in order to work and also to help raise her younger siblings. I was able to get a master's degree in business administration. So from one generation, we were able to go from an 8th grade education to an advanced degree. In 1996, I made my first $1 million. In 1997, I became a multimillionaire. How was this possible? I believe through the sacrifices of my grandparents and my parents and the life lessons taught to me. I am truly standing on their shoulders. Now, some would dismiss the discrimination that occurred on Nantucket as a thing of the past, having no relevance to today. Social and economic experts would disagree. The wealth gap between people of color and whites reveals the effects of accumulated inequality, discrimination, and lost opportunity. Being impeded from building wealth has a cascading effect. The result, the net worth of white versus black varies by an order of magnitude, 171,000 versus 17,000. What happened yesterday matters today. Now, what about the exceptions? I hear them ask. There are always those, especially endowed, who are able to rise above their circumstances. History is replete with those successes. But why should exceptional be the criteria for success when equal opportunity is all that's required? I had no intentions of returning back to Nantucket. But in 2005, my daughter approached me and said, "Dad, I want to go to Nantucket." Now, my daughter worked as a dock girl at the boat basin. She was able to get that customer-facing job because my godfather was the dock master. Now, she wanted to return to Nantucket because she wanted to be the person on the yacht passing her line to the dock girl. So for those of you that are parents of a daughter you know that when a daughter asks you something, it melts your heart and you have to do it. So that year, we brought our yacht up from Florida and we got a slip in Hingham Harbor and we at the Hingham Marina, and we stayed there for the summer. And one weekend, we ventured to Nantucket. When we arrived at the boat basin, lo and behold, there was the dock girl. My daughter on the bow passed the line to the dock girl. And at that point, she went from dock girl to yacht girl, coming full circle. So we tied up the boat. We headed up Main Street. We didn't get more than 100 yards before we encountered Augie Ramus. We spoke for a time, reminisced about the old days. He talked to us and filled us in about what was going on, his work that he was doing with affordable housing. Now, I knew Augie way back when. He was 18 years old when he arrived in Nantucket, Cape Verdean, penniless, brash, outspoken. He became a thorn in the side of the town of Nantucket. But over time, he would become a successful businessman, a community leader, and a town leader. He had come full circle. Now, I left Nantucket as a poor child and returned on my yacht. I had come full circle. Yet after I left, I felt that something was missing. The Cape Verdean history being told, I felt, was inadequate and inaccurate. Saying in one sentence, they arrived on whaling ships and now held prominent positions in the town diminished their struggles. I wanted the story to be told in a way that examined their lives and projected their humanity. The idea for Oh Nantucket was born. Now, I had written previous books, and my first book met with moderate success. I was featured on the Phil Donahue Show, featured on the Joan Rivers Show, and also People Are Talking in the Boston area. So I knew how to write, and I had written several books subsequent to that. But I didn't know how to approach writing about Nantucket. I couldn't write a documentary because all the detailed facts that took place were lost with the deaths of 3 generations of my family. I couldn't write a biography for the same reason. So I thought, I'll write a historical novel, what I called factualized fiction. This was a story about a couple, a community, and the social conditions surrounding them, confronting the history and examining the causes. For me, this was a remembrance and a labor of love. Now, any author will tell you that once you start writing a novel, the characters take over and they determine where the novel is going to go. In the last chapter, you'll realize who the novel says is the author of Oh Nantucket. And you will see that the novel ends as it begins. If you then go ahead and reread the front matter with that new perspective, you will see that the author in the novel is not the author on the cover. I want to leave you with a bit of history to contextualize the Cape Verdean story. The experience of my grandfather was the experience of many young Cape Verdean men. He was born in 1896 in Browne in the Cape Verde Islands. Between the 1580s and the 1950s, drought plagued the Cape Verde Islands. And during that period, tens of thousands of Cape Verdeans died from starvation and disease. Those who could fled the islands for Africa, Europe, South America, and the United States. Those who could not sent their eldest children to live with relatives abroad to earn money to send back to their families. Now, my grandfather arrived in New Bedford at the age of 15, not speaking a word of English. His name was Manuel Teixeira. His mother's maiden name was Gomes, but in the confusion with the language, his name got transposed to Manuel Teixeira Gomes. He would find his way to Nantucket. He would meet my grandmother, they would get married, they would have children, and they would do their best to care for them. During all this time, from the day he arrived to the day he died in 1956, he would send food and clothing back to his family in the Cape Verde Islands. But he would never, ever see a member of his family ever again. In the year 2000, my mother found out that his brother's wife was living in Orlando, Florida. And I was living in Florida, so my mother came down and we went down to meet her. Now, when my grandfather left the Cape Verde Islands, his younger brother was 2 years old. Now they had both passed. So his brother's wife told us that they had 7 children and 27 grandchildren, our relatives that we had never met. So I wrote a poem that I wanted to dedicate to my grandfather and to all the men like him who sacrificed so much for family. The poem is entitled Minha Tierra Longe, My Faraway Land. They sailed in ships across the sea in search of life, not liberty. Some stayed behind who could not leave, for those our hearts still often grieved. A family once in daily life, now torn apart by miles and strife. We write and send whate'er we can from this new and distant land. Our feelings mixed of our new home, though life is good, we feel alone. Going back's a constant cry, the feeling strong, I can't deny. But life is here, a family new, my wife, my sons, my daughters too. The islands remain within my soul, and perhaps I'll return before I go. But for now, I have the work at hand and will strive to prosper in this land. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Peter. You can go in, everyone listening, you can go into the Q&A or go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We have a couple of them. Amy and I will read them out. I guess I'll go first. Let's see, we have, including this event, what other steps are being taken to document the Cape Verdean experiences on Nantucket? Also, is there a curriculum available that documents the experiences of Cape Verdeans in America?
There are a number of books that are written. There's a fellow who wrote a book about the Cape Verdeans of New Bedford, which I read. His last name is Costa. I forget his first name, but it's an excellent book that he's written. There's another book that was written about the Cape Verdeans in Howich, which I've read parts of. I'm going to tell you this. This is my opinion. There's also the Nantucket Historical Association that has done a documentation of Cape Verdeans on the island. I disapprove of what they've written. I've approached them on it. Their content has errors in it and inaccuracies. I've pointed this out to them. They are offended by it. They don't like me. So we don't have a good relationship, but there's content out there and you should view it if you think it's appropriate.
Amy, do you want to do the next one?
Sure. A number of people are asking you, Peter, if you've ever visited the Cape Verde Islands, and if you did, what was your impression of them?
No, I have not, and it saddens me that I have not, but no, I have not. The only way I've flown over them in my my Microsoft flight simulator, and I've flown over every single island and looked at them all in detail from the air, and the flight simulator is incredibly amazing in its accuracy. But no, I have not visited the islands.
Someone said you're a Nantucket native and have so many memories on Nantucket, yet you have a summer home on the vineyard. Why is that?
Well, my granddaughter interviewed me and wrote a piece about that, and it's on my website, on the blog. It's called Confronting History. But basically, after we lost our home on Nantucket due to family disputes, my heart was broken. I mean, my entire family on my mother's side is buried in Nantucket. My father's ashes were buried in Nantucket Harbor. But I've just lost my feeling for the island with the loss of our homes. And not only my home on 41 Washington Street, but my great-grandparents' home was at 17 Washington Street, and that was also sold. So it saddens me to be there.
So with that in mind, was it particularly difficult for you to write Oh Nantucket, where you had to kind of revisit the islands and go over your history with it?
No, because I love the community. I loved the summers that I spent on Nantucket and the people that I met. It was a beautiful time for me growing up there as a child in the summer. And I have many pleasant memories of the island.
And so someone's asking, are you in contact with the island's present Cape Verde community? And if yes, how would you summarize their plights or successes?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. Oh, wait, hang on. He just moved. Are you in contact with the island's current Cape Verde community? And if yes, how would you summarize their plights or their successes?
Yeah, as I said in the book, which is Factualized Fiction, and as I've noted I have a new website that I put up. It's called cvnantucket.org, where I've written a number of articles about Nantucket and the people that I knew on the island. And what my feeling is that the community that existed does not exist anymore. That was confirmed to me by a video that I watched by Augie Ramus, where he said point blank, he said 35 years ago, the things that made the community no longer exist. So there are people of Cape Verdean background that are living there, but the community really doesn't exist as a community. My opinion, Augie's opinion, others would disagree.
Let's see, Scott wants to know, does the vineyard have a similar Cape Verdean history?
Well, there are Cape Verdeans on the island here as well. I don't know how many. There are a few. My neighbor's Cape Verdean. And they have a Portuguese American club here. But I don't think there's a community the way there was community in the old days, where you knew everyone, you waved, you talked, you knew everything about their family, you gossiped about them when they weren't looking. No, those things don't exist anymore. And even in Mr. Costa's book, where he wrote about New Bedford, he stated the same thing happened in New Bedford. He says the community there are Cape Verdeans there, but the community no longer exists.
We have a comment from Alexis, who says your book is fabulous. And she asks, what are you hoping for as an outcome from the book?
What I wanted as an outcome from the book is I wanted all the townspeople who were in charge of the town to read it and to understand the impact that it had on the people way back then. And part of the issue is that I think it's important to acknowledge the history to be able to move forward honestly, and not to just say they arrived on whaling ships and now they're prominent people in the community. There's a whole lot that happened in between.
Yeah, it does seem like the Cape Verde history in southeastern Massachusetts in general is kind of, skipped over. But I know that in the cranberry industry and in the fishing industry, that the Cape Verde community just had a huge contribution. And so thank you for, kind of filling in a lot of that story.
Well, it was a labor of love for me. I wanted them to be recognized, and I wanted the struggles to be seen. But I also wanted to know that they had warts too. I mean, they weren't they were prejudiced. They did things that weren't appropriate. It's human nature, and so I wanted to humanize them, and I also wanted to recognize the impact of what happened on future generations. It's just a reality.
Mhm.
It's interesting where the book is set so long ago that, when that couple came to in the book, but also in the book, the couple went and said, we're leaving, we can pass as white, we're going to go someplace else, we can't take this anymore. It was sort of point final, like it really was like you left and you didn't come back. There was no Facebook, there was no staying in touch. So it really, like, these decisions were so much more concrete. And even before that, for people leaving the islands to come to Nantucket, it was kind of done, and there really was no return ticket. And
the message that I got from that as a young child sitting there and having that experience was that they didn't dare, come back and for anybody to see that they were Cape Verdean, because as soon as they saw it, then, oh, you're Cape Verdean, oh, you're fired.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't dare risk it. So when they came and talked to my grandma, they told her they were never coming back.
Yeah.
Here's a question, a little bit of a departure. Someone wants to know how you became a millionaire.
Well, I was a Microsoft corporate executive. And as a Microsoft corporate executive, one of the things they do is shower you with stock options. And in my first few years at Microsoft, the stock split 8 times. So I was just lucky. See, I'm not skilled, I'm just lucky. I admit it.
You're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Well, I really like the point you made about there's a success story and then everyone quickly rushes and say, see, it's possible. See, you just have to dig in and overcome adversity. And not everyone can or wants to go and get a master's degree or advanced education and be, work in the corporate world. Sometimes they just want a simple life where they work a full-time job and they buy a house, and that's equally admirable, but not really possible for many people. And I don't know, I just thought that was a very interesting point you made.
Yeah, no, that was a point that I was trying to make, is that, you can't just say that somebody became prominent in the island when many, many people were forced to leave. And they literally were forced to leave because they couldn't earn a living. And that is ignored. And it's even ignored. I've had Cape Verdeans on the island tell me that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay, happened to my family, so I know it happened.
Another note I made, and I didn't bring the book with me to look, but at one point you mentioned, I think you used the word unskilled labor. And I think that's such an interesting term. And I think now it would become like low wage work or whatever. And I think that's a misnomer, because even everything from like painting to house cleaning, all these jobs that are unskilled or low wage are really skilled labor. Like there is a lot of craft that goes into doing it well.
Exactly, very true.
Yeah. All right, I'll stop talking. There's more questions. Let's see, we have, I read in the NHA that Cape Verdeans were not allowed to marry inside the church until the 1950s. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, that's a fact. The Cape Verdeans were treated as second-class citizens by the priests and by the Catholic Church. And like I said, my grandmother and my aunts, they would sit there in the living room with those rosary beads, and they would be going through those. They were just as religious as they could be, and they weren't paying any attention to the fact that the church wasn't treating them appropriately. They had a communication with their God, and that was what mattered to them.
There's a question here that asks, did the Cape Verdean immigration to Nantucket ebb and flow from the whaling days over time?
Well, I want to be honest. I'm not an expert on what happened way back when. I know that the fact that my family and extended families didn't come over with the whaling groups. They came over from Howich and New Bedford and places like that. And they picked cranberries and berries and all that stuff in the bogs, but they weren't whalers. And I don't know any of the families that I know of that go back to the whaling families. For Cape Verdeans, I don't know, but I'm not an expert in that area.
And then I think we have time. We have a little bit more time. So if you want to ask a question, jump in now. There's one more in the Q&A. How did you or your family decide to move to Florida?
Well, when I retired in 1999, because I refused to work in the 21st century, my wife's sister was living in Florida, and we wanted to be close to family, and we wanted to get out of the weather and all that kind of stuff. So we thought that was cool. So we lived in Florida for 21 years, and we just sold our home in Florida, and we're moving to my wife's hometown area in Vermont, right across the border, to be close to family, her family, because my family is basically gone except for my daughter and son and my two granddaughters. My family's all passed.
So one question I always like to ask writers is, what are you working on now? Do you have another book in the works?
No, I'm not working on any books now. I'm like, this one has taken a lot out of me, and I was asked to write a sequel, and I don't think I'm going to do it. I'm about to have my 80th birthday come the 4th of July, and I don't think I have the energy to go through it. But I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm like I said, I would ask any of you who are interested to check out my website, cvnantucket.org. I've written a lot of articles there, and I've written a lot of blogs on my own website, petermbrowne.com. And on the blog, some of the blogs are related to extending the novel. So there are additional stories that weren't covered in the novel, because I'll tell you this about writing the book. While I was writing the book, coronavirus came, and I thought, I'm going to die before I finish this book. I mean, I'm in Florida. You know what's going on in Florida. It's a crazy place to be with coronavirus. I'm talking to my editor. I'm going like, I got to move faster. I got to write this book. I got to get it done. So things that I would have added in the book on the blogs, because I wanted to wrap the book up so I could get it done before Corona got me, and it's still trying to get me.
Well, I got to say, you don't look like you're about to be 80. So we have a question. Let's make this the last one. This person asks, how are you going to positively impact / remember the Cape Verdean experiences on Nantucket in the future? Do you have like a takeaway from your experience of growing up here?
Well, what I would like to do is, I'm trying to put up a memorial to the Cape Verdeans, and I wanted to do that on Nantucket. I had approached NHA about it, and that went sideways. And I was speaking to, what's his name? Kamal
McCarthy.
Kamal McCarthy. I was speaking to him about funding a memorial for the Cape Verdeans on Nantucket. And we started talking, and he was all excited, and I haven't heard a word from him in 2 months. So I'm looking for other alternatives, because if you go on this website, cvnantucket.org, you'll see that I've created a plaque on the website. And I would like to see that plaque placed somewhere on Nantucket to memorialize the Cape Verdeans and their struggle. So I'm working with that, and I like to work with the town if they're interested. If they're not interested, then maybe. And I've given my daughter and my granddaughter this mission. I said, if I don't do it, then I want you to pursue it when the next generation of people are in charge in Nantucket, to see if we can get this done. Because I think that the Cape Verdeans need to be recognized for their presence on the island, and not just the ones who were able to be successful and being town leaders or like my godfather, who was fortunate enough to get a position at the boat basin and become a millionaire. There are all the other folks in between that need to be acknowledged.
All right. Well, that seems like an excellent note to end on. Food for thought for people.
What about Barry?
I want to thank you for sharing your time with us.
It's my pleasure.
And you're getting lots of love in the chat. Thank yous, and people are glad you're still writing and have found that your talk to be really thought-provoking.
Well, good. So check out my blog and check out my website, cvnantucket.org. And to everyone, I would say, muito obrigado. Thank you very much.
And pick up the book. It's at the Hub, it's at Bookworks, and it's at Mitchell's.
And it's excellent. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this. This was excellent.
It was really nice meeting you, Peter. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. I was hoping that I would meet you guys when I was on Nantucket for that brief interlude, but that was during the holiday weekend. Everybody was not working.
Yeah. We'll get you over here someday, hopefully next summer in person.
Oh, good enough. I look forward to it.
Okay. Have a great night. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Night.
Okay, can I get this going here?